There are a few video game franchises that span across the many areas of video game history. Some games are frequently re-released, but only the greats see newly developed games with each new generation of hardware. That means classic video game franchises like Mario, Pac-Man, or The Simpsons? The first and perhaps best-known title is Konami's The Simpsons Arcade game. Released in 1991 as Simpsons Mania swept across America and the world, the arcade game proved to be a perennial quarter muncher, with colorful and lively designs and frenetic gameplay that has drawn in players for decades. There's nary a classic arcade that doesn't have the game tucked away among its rows of machines. And there have even been modern releases on platforms like Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, as well as a reproduction cabinet from Arcade 1-Up. Bart vs. the Space Mutants debuted on the NES that same spring. Published by Acclaim in New York and developed just across the Hudson River by Imagineering in New Jersey. The game is infamous for an ambitious opening level, followed by a middling mess of bad platforming. The multi-headed hydra of Bart vs. the Space Mutants arrived on nearly a dozen different platforms, with its alien invasion plot inspired by the sci-fi movie They Live.
Blinded us to the truth! Take a look.
Acclaim teamed up with Imagineering again to release Bart Simpson's Escape from Camp Deadly in 1991. Designed as a platformer with limited visuals for the Game Boy, it was also the one Simpsons game headlined by legendary Pitfall developer David Crane. This summer camp horror story was also notably released before the show's own take on the idea, the Season 4 episode titled Camp Krusty.
Dear Mom and Dad, I no longer fear hell, because I've been to Camp Krusty.
Imagineering continued to stoke the fires of Bartmania with their final 1991 release, Bart vs. the World. They eschewed any attempt at clever puzzles and instead took the player on a trip to China, the Arctic, Egypt, and Hollywood, each featuring a motley mix of platformer levels and parlor games. The eclectic settings also provide a far more interesting backdrop to the generic platforming, and it features one of the best endings ever seen in a Simpsons video game, if the player actually collects all of the hidden collectibles in the game. The first and perhaps most surprising entry of 1992 is Bart's House of Weirdness from Konami. This 1992 PC exclusive from Distinctive Software is an action game, with a light pinch of adventure gaming. The goal is to clumsily navigate through levels populated by lots of fan service and deadly elements from Bart's imagination. Krusty Super Funhouse, developed by Fox Williams and Audiogenic, is a game inspired by Lemmings that allows the player to fulfill their rat extermination fantasies. Players control Krusty as he rounds up marching rats and guides them to traps to meet a grisly demise. Strangely enough, the more technically impressive 16-bit ports released before the simplified 8-bit ports. And the game is actually a reskinned release of an Amiga puzzle game called Rat Trap. It wouldn't be the early 90s without a new game featuring America's favorite rat boy, so Bart's Nightmare followed later in 1992. Development duty fell to Sculptured Software, who crafted a journey down a bizarre rabbit hole that sees Bart wander a Lynchian wasteland. They traded 8-bit stylings for something that felt distinctly next-gen, even if the platformer game design was found wanting. The good news is they had nightmare-inducing levels that finally looked like something you'd see on the TV show. Meanwhile, Acclaim rushed out their handheld continuation of Bart's conflict with the entire planet at the end of the year with Bart vs. the Juggernauts. It was a strange mix of minigames and, naturally, platformer levels, as well as the novel idea to include, actual jokes and dialogue. The game designers pulled the level ideas from that most sacred of institutions, American Gladiator. Imagineering's final turn at bat arrived in the form of Bartman meets Radioactive Man in early 1993. The game utilizes Bart's heroic alter ego to provide players with new abilities such as flight and I-beams, but it fell flat in a market dominated by the arrival of 16-bit consoles. This final entry in the 8-bit Bart trilogy originally shipped on NES, but also made it to the Game Gear, courtesy of a relatively unknown developer called Teeny Weeny Games. The game design matches the NES version, but unfortunately has worse performance on the tiny screen. 1993 was rife with more ports of Simpsons games, and it wasn't until early 1994 that the world saw a new Simpsons game on the shelves. The next Game Boy entry from Acclaim was Bart and the Beanstalk, a quaint but forgettable platformer that fetches upwards of $700 on eBay. The world ends not with a bang, but with a whimper. And so it goes for Acclaim's series of Simpsons games on the Game Boy. They took a short break when the Bart market started to waver, and came back in the summer of 1994 with their final Game Boy game, Itchy and Scratchy and Miniature Golf Madness. Surely the kids were clamoring for these two violent characters to play an orderly game of minigolf. The slow rate of releases was a portent of the end, but Acclaim went out with a bang when they brought sculptured software back to develop Virtual Bart. This late '94 release was another grab bag of strange levels that includes standard platformer fare and pseudo 3D romps in post-apocalyptic road wars, water slides, and oddly enough, a Vandal's take on golf. Unfortunately, Bart's final solo outing was just as obtuse as the previous one. And while it could be fun to see Bart getting tortured, it didn't go over so well when it's turned against the player.
Oh no!
Acclaim's last breath exhaled in the form of the Itchy and Scratchy game in early 1995. It was featured in magazines for SNES and the Sega Genesis, but was abruptly cancelled for Sega's console just before it would have shipped to stores. In contrast to previous games, developer Bits Limited designed a mindless derivative action game to go alongside the impressive animations, and sets the player on a quest to kill Scratchy a whole lot. The art was the best it's ever been, but game design left something to be desired. "1995 marked the beginning of a fallow period in Simpsons game releases. During the break, 20th Century Fox formed the Fox Interactive subsidiary in order to publish their own original games, as well as games that leverage their stable of licenses. And so Virtual Springfield launched in 1997 as the first Simpsons game after the end of Acclaim's reign as publisher.
Oh look, it's the idiot parade.
Their first effort with The Simpsons is an impressive point-and-click exploration game by Digital Evolution that features plenty of visual gags and original dialogue from the cast of the TV show. Eight years had passed since Konami's first Simpsons game, but they got another turn at bringing The Simpsons to arcades with the Simpsons Bowling in 2000. This time, the game allowed up to 4 players to play a regular game of bowling with one of the cast of the TV show as their avatar. A unique trackball controller somewhat mimicked the act of rolling the ball down the lanes, and all of the show's original cast chimed in with plenty of one-liners to please the ears. This new approach of including the entire family kicked off alongside the show's merchandise renaissance from the early aughts. Now unencumbered by Bartmania, THQ and Software Creations made what is undoubtedly the best Simpsons game on a Game Boy system, with Night of the Living Treehouse of Horror in 2001. This Game Boy Color exclusive featured many platformer levels, with the occasional change in perspective to make things interesting. In color and featuring the entire family, it unfortunately released too late in the Game Boy Color's life to make much of a splash. The first PlayStation launched in 1994 to great success, and it only took 7 years for someone to try and put a Simpsons game on it. And that would be the Simpsons Wrestling in spring of 2001, published by Activision, and developed by Big Ape Productions. Much like Simpsons Bowling and some later games, the key hook was a chance to play as one of many beloved Springfield regulars. The gameplay was a contest of, wrestling, which even the developers knew was a stretch, for it was simply two Springfieldians bashing each other senseless. While always late to the platforms of previous generations, it didn't take long for The Simpsons to show up on the new Xbox, GameCube, PlayStation 2, and even Game Boy Advance. And The Simpsons Road Rage from Radical Entertainment closed out 2001 with a decidedly ripped-off open-world taxi game, in which myriad Simpsons characters ferry Springfield citizens around town. Radical's refreshing and surprisingly fun take on the crazy taxi formula was jam-packed with one-liners, plenty of open space, and the game's design ensured players were always on the move. Road Rage brought The Simpsons out of a rough few years with both its financial and gameplay success, demonstrating that The Simpsons game could be fun and sell well.
Run along now. Way to ignore the speed limit. Hot diggity.
Rancho relaxo, por favor.
Do you have my pills?
EA returned as publisher after Road Rage to release the Simpsons Skateboarding in 2002. This game from developer Code Monkeys strived to reach the same heights as the famed Tony Hawk's Pro Skater franchise, but fell far short with its janky visuals and barren environments. While they had the right idea in designing massive open environments in which players could freely explore Springfield, the skateboarding gameplay was simply the wrong execution for it.
50-50 grind.
Mess with the best, end up like the rest.
EA lost the Simpsons license to Vivendi Universal Games when Radical teamed up with a new publisher to release the Simpsons Hit and Run in 2003. Frequently mentioned as the best Simpsons game ever, this Grand Theft Auto clone brought the sandbox gameplay of Grand Theft Auto to Springfield, as well as an original story and quality writing to bolster the gameplay. It was a well-earned success for the developer and the Simpsons franchise. Hit and Run even has a very active mod scene with enough content for several new games, and vocal interest from the fans that hope to see a remastered edition on modern platforms. While a sequel to Hit and Run seemed like a sure thing, fans instead went through another quiet period while EA reacquired the license, and began work on multiple new Simpsons projects. The wait would last until summer of 2007, when the first Simpsons mobile game arrived for feature phones using the Java operating system. Minutes to Meltdown released around the time of the Simpsons movie, and even features the infamous Spider Pig. Gameplay involves controlling Homer in an isometric adventure game, as he attempts to save Springfield from a nuclear disaster. EA Redwood Shores went for the mic drop when they shipped the Simpsons game in fall of 2007. This next-gen take on the standard action platformer formula featured primo visuals, a far-reaching satirical look at the video game industry, and jokes on jokes on jokes. Gameplay was so-so, but worth the slog. All 5 members of the Simpsons family were playable, and there were a variety of different levels, in addition to a large Springfield hub that could be explored, albeit with little to do there. But hey, great cutscenes.
No chewing. Chewing's for chumps. Nothing but swallow. Nothing but swallow.
I hope I win. Last year I was the first guy to barf.
Barf, please. In this business, we refer to that as a Roman incident.
That does sound a lot classier.
What are you worried about?
The Simpsons game was a big swing for the fences on modern platforms,
Dad, buy me this new video game. Krusty said you have to.
but it was the mobile game market where the Simpsons would find their final resting place. The previous mobile developer, G5 Mobile, returned in 2008 for another game featuring isometric adventuring and puzzles. The levels include colorful themes like Explosion Land and Searing Gaspain Land. Itchy and Scratchy Land is based on the classic episode that takes the family to the violentest place on Earth.
Such a violent motif.
The transition from feature phones to smartphones led to the release of the Simpsons Arcade. Though not that Simpsons Arcade. Released in late 2009, this game by Iron Monkey Studios played a lot like the beat-em-up from 1991, but featured Homer as the sole playable character and myriad enemies taken right from the TV show. The next and final game had a rocky start when it launched in 2012, but EA Mobile eventually settled the server issues and turned Tapped Out into the biggest Simpsons game ever. With profits in the hundreds of millions of dollars, Tapped Out brought addictive city building to fans, and guaranteed that EA Mobile would have no appetite for making another Simpsons game ever again.
I think at some point, if you play a mobile game, you know you're being an idiot when you spend money in it, and you know, I think they like the truth.
Refreshing to admit it.
Yeah.
Tapped Out has been the only game in town for a while, but there are signs that experimentation is still possible, such as the Planet of the Couches VR experience from 2016. And for better or worse, smartphones have been the home of the Simpsons video games for over a decade. Like the TV show, there's no telling if or when we'll stop getting Simpsons games. But one thing is certain, there's no shortage of past games to discover and explore, if only for their wacky existence.
Well, I was getting sick of the premise anyway. VR.
All my friends have died. Why didn't I borrow more money from them? Damn me! Damn! No!